There's a quote by John C. Maxwell that says, "Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less." And what that means to us is that, first of all, we're all leaders in some capacity because we all have influence on at least one person in our life. And it also means that your leadership effectiveness can be measured by the amount of influence you have on others. Today I'm going to talk about Joshua's leadership and about his influence on the tribe of Ephraim and ultimately on the entire nation. In the book of Numbers, we read about the 12 spies who went to the land of Canaan. They were chosen because they were leaders of their respective tribes. And as we remember, the 10 gave a bad report, but Joshua and Caleb tried to encourage the people. They believed that the Israelites could be successful with the help of God, but their encouragement wasn't received very well. Numbers 14:10 says, "And all the congregation said to stone them with stones." Thankfully, God intervened, his glory filled the tabernacle, and he pronounced judgment on the Israelites. As we remember, they were sentenced to 40 years in the wilderness, one year for every day of the 40 days that they had spied out the land. And all the men of military fighting age from 20 years and above were sentenced to die during that wandering, except for Caleb of the tribe of Judah and Joshua of the tribe of Ephraim. I think it's interesting that Caleb was of Judah and Joshua was of Ephraim. Judah was a very prominent tribe. We obviously remember. They always had a prominent role, especially once King David arrived. But Ephraim, throughout the Old Testament, rivaled Judah for the leadership of the Hebrew people. Judah was the largest tribe, but Ephraim, on the other hand, was the third smallest in size, according to the census taken in Numbers. But Ephraim rivaled Judah, and after the arrival into the Promised Land, the cities of Shechem and Shiloh, located in the territory of Ephraim, became the religious center, not Jerusalem. And that was the center of worship for the Israelites for over 350 consecutive years. When King Solomon died, 9 other tribes followed Ephraim to form the northern kingdom, except for the tribe of Benjamin that followed Judah. And of course, the Levites aren't one of the 12 tribes, and they were neutral and remained in both territories. But that word Ephraim, you'll read in the Old Testament, it became synonymous for all the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. So how was a small tribe with a small territory such a prominent leader? How and why did Ephraim become so important? I think an answer to those questions can be found with the study of someone we're talking about in the book of Exodus, Joshua. Joshua was the son of Nun of the tribe of Ephraim. He was born in Egypt a slave, like all the other Hebrews. He must have been a talented individual to be chosen as the personal assistant to Moses. Numbers 11:28 says that he was Moses' attendant since his youth. And most would agree that Joshua would have been his attendant when he was around 30 or 40 years of age. Because as Anderson taught on Wednesday, Joshua was old enough to lead the armies of Israel against the Amalekites, and that was prior to the 40 years of wilderness wanderings. But we can see that Joshua is mentioned several times in the book of Exodus, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But what we can see is that Joshua's story is a part of the story of Ephraim. If you recall, Ephraim and Manasseh were the 2 sons of Joseph. And I talked about this in another lesson as a reminder, but Joseph received a double portion blessing from his father Jacob, and who added Joseph's sons. He adopted both the sons as his own. And when Joseph brought Ephraim and Manasseh to Jacob to be blessed by him, he crossed his arms and put his right hand on Ephraim, and he blessed him over his older brother Manasseh. It makes sense that the tribes would keep Ephraim in high esteem. The fact that Ephraim was the favored one of Jacob and ultimately of God. Ephraim may have been only half the size of Judah, but that's because they had one less generation. You can really see the power of exponential growth. If Manasseh and Ephraim had been combined into a single tribe of Joseph, they would have been as large as the tribe of Judah. And often in the Old Testament, they are collectively referred to as the house of Joseph, like in the book of Obadiah, or the children of Joseph, like in the book of Joshua. So when you see these terms, you know the Bible's referring to Ephraim and Manasseh. But the greatest advantage to being these two tribes was that they were blessed with double the amount of land. I don't know if you can see that small picture there, but Ephraim enjoyed a real strategic advantage in its land allotment. It was located right in the center of Canaan, surrounded by all the other tribes, including their full brother tribes, Benjamin and Manasseh. Remember, those were the sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And so at this time, the two biggest threats were Egypt in the south and the Hittites in the north. And so as you can see, Ephraim was kind of shielded from an attack from Egypt from the south and the Edomites as well as the Hittites from the north and later the Assyrians. Ephraim was also a very fertile land, but it was located in the mountains, so it was much more easily defensible. As I said, Ephraim was foremost among the 10 tribes, and so that word Ephraim became synonymous with the whole northern kingdom. And you'll read that in the book of Chronicles, Hosea, Isaiah, and other prophets. They'll just refer to Ephraim when they're talking about the whole northern kingdom. In fact, the capital of Israel, I don't know if you can see it there on the map, Samaria, was located near the border of Ephraim and Manasseh, just 6 miles from Shechem. And the first king of the northern kingdom was Jeroboam I, was an Ephraimite. So the fact that Ephraim was blessed by God and Jacob may have contributed to the fact that a man of Ephraim, Joshua, was given the opportunity to be the personal attendant to Moses. The first mention we have of Joshua occurred in Exodus 17, as Anderson discussed on Wednesday. In Exodus 17, Amalek came and attacked the Israelites in the wilderness, and Anderson gave us that story. But in 17:9, it says, "And Moses said to Joshua, 'Choose us some men to go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand.'" It doesn't say how Joshua was chosen by Moses or why, but I think it seems like they had a trusted relationship already at this time, which favors the theory that Joshua was already the assistant of Moses when he was chosen to lead the troops. Moses trusted Joshua to pick the right troops, to follow Moses' command, and to lead them into battle. And remember, at this point, the people had rebelled against Moses multiple times. The book of Numbers tells us that Joshua's original name was Hoshea or Hosea, which means salvation. At some point, Moses was renamed Joshua, which means the Lord saves or Yahweh saves. The Bible isn't specific exactly on when that occurred, but it would make sense that it could have occurred after the Battle of Amalek because, of course, God was the one who granted the victory. Or it may have been after Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to it. If you recall, for that incident, Moses wasn't allowed in the Promised Land because for that moment he forgot who was in charge. But either way, Joshua lived with the very name that reminded him that God was in charge, that he brought the victories, the blessings, and salvation. In Exodus 24, in what appears to be the 4th time that Moses went up on the mountain, he received the tablets of stone written with the finger of God, and he left the people behind with Aaron while he went up the mountain. But he didn't go up the mountain alone. Exodus 24:13 says, "So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God." It doesn't specify how far Joshua went with him, but he was the only one to travel with Moses into the cloud. I think there's an allusion here to Abraham and Isaac's faithful worship on the mountain. In Exodus 24, Moses had spoke to the people, just like Abraham spoke to his servants, and then just the two of them went up on the mountain. We also know that Moses was up on the mountain because in Exodus 32, after the people built the golden calf down below, God told Moses to proceed down the mountain. And then in Exodus 32 and verse 15, it says, "And Moses turned and went down from the mountain. The 2 tablets of testimony were in his hand. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, 'There's noise of war in the camp.' But he said, 'It is not the noise of the shout of victory, nor the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear.'" And so we see in this passage that Joshua was with Moses when he was on his way down the mountain, and that they first encountered the sound of the people and the golden calf incident. They were together when they both first heard the people doing that. So I think it's really interesting that Joshua and Moses were the only two who were guiltless of the golden calf incident. When Moses was unable to enter the promised land, it was Joshua who fulfilled his mission. Joshua 1:1, this is paraphrased just the first verse, and then it picks up in verse 5, but it says, "And after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, 'Moses, my servant, is dead.' And then picking up in verse 5, it says, 'No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave or forsake you. Be strong and of good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law, which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Just wanted to point out, I kind of highlighted there, Moses, the servant of the Lord. Moses was exalted by God, obviously through the miracles he performed, but he was also exalted by God by being called the servant of the Lord by him and by all the Israelites. Joshua was never given a title of king. He, like Moses, was seen as the servant of the Lord. And that's where his legitimacy as a commander came from. It was even recorded in his epithet after he died. In Joshua 24 and verse 9, it says, "Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died being 110 years old." God parted the waters of the Jordan for Joshua like he parted the waters of the Red Sea for Moses. Joshua brought the people into the promised land of Canaan and led them through many victories. These included the battles of Jericho and Ai, and in the defense of the Gibeonites, where he commanded, he prayed to God for the sun to stand still, and God did that so that the Israelites could defeat the Amorite kings. Joshua 10:15, it says, "The Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel." In total, Joshua led the Israelites for approximately 5 years of initial military campaigning, and then another 25 years of life. And of course, these numbers aren't solid. They're just estimates based on the scriptures. We have actual numbers of like the age of Caleb, for example, and so forth. But it just kind of gives you a perspective of what he did. He would have been about 40 when he became the assistant to Moses. Just like Moses, when he led the people out of Egypt, it was 80. Joshua would have been about 80 when he led them into the promised land. 5 years after being in the promised land, Caleb was 85. And so Joshua would have been around the same age based on other texts as well. And then that's where we kind of come up with that math. But you see, it was, there was a lot of time there that he was influencing and leading the people. He, along with Eleazar, oversaw the allotment of the promised land to the Israelites. Think how much the people trusted him for him to oversee that allotment process, if you will, with God doing, leading it. but that kind of speaks to the trust that the people had in him. But during that time, Ephraim was allotted 2 cities that I think are important to the story of Joshua and Ephraim, and I just want to talk about them briefly, and then we'll be done for the day. Those cities are Shechem and Shiloh. The religious center of Israel during the era of Joshua and the Judges was Shiloh and Shechem, which were both located in the territory of Ephraim. One was in the territory of Manasseh, but was allotted to Ephraim, and they both were about 20 miles north of Jerusalem. Shechem was an important city throughout the Bible. In Genesis 12, verse 6, when Abram and Lot first entered the land of Canaan, it says that Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Morah. And so that's where he built his first altar to the Lord in the land of Canaan to renew his covenant. Shechem was also the first place that Jacob lived when he arrived in the land of Canaan, after he left Laban and met Esau on the way. He also built an altar to God at Shechem and renewed his covenant. Later on, Joshua 24:32 says, the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought out of the land of Egypt, they buried at Shechem, in the plot of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, and which had become an inheritance for the children of Joseph. Now, when it says Shechem had become an inheritance for the children of Joseph, that means for the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh, as we previously noted. So, as I said, interestingly, Shechem is located, you can see there, I circled it, inside the territory of Manasseh. But it was one of the cities that was allotted to Ephraim. Joshua 16, verse 9, talks about how some of Manasseh's cities were specifically allotted. And so why was that? Why were some of the cities allotted? Well, in the case of Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, Joshua 19:9 says that those cities were allotted inside Judah, that territory for Simeon, because Judah was too small. So in other words, their territory was so large, they didn't have the population to properly inhabit it. And so Simeon's tribe, was given land inside Judah. This may have been the same reason that the cities were allotted to Ephraim, because Manasseh's territory was so large. If you recall, you can see West Manasseh, that big purple area is East Manasseh on the other side of the Jordan. So Manasseh had territory on both sides. Wasn't quite as large as Judah, but it was a pretty big territory. So later on, Ephraim would give this city of Shechem to the Levites, as one of their cities to dwell in, and it also became a refuge city. But in Deuteronomy 27, God told Moses to tell the people when they crossed the Jordan to set up an altar at Mount Ebal, at the base of Mount Ebal, and to have half the tribes stand on Mount Gerizim and half the tribes on Mount Ebal, and that as a giant chorus they would pronounce the blessings and the curses of God, and in this way they would renew their covenant. And if you can see on the map there's Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and right at the base of Mount Ebal is, of course, the town of Shechem. So I find that pretty profound. If you think about it, the children of Israel, after they crossed the Jordan, they attacked Jericho, right? It was the first city. So they fought their way through Jericho and Ai on their way to Shechem to renew their covenant with God the same way that Abram and Jacob had done. And that's recorded in Joshua chapter 8. Shiloh was also a very important city of Ephraim. The tabernacle containing the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets of stone, the central location of worship for the Israelites, was erected there in Shiloh by Joshua. It was there at the door of the tabernacle, it says in the book of Joshua, that Joshua and Eleazar actually allotted much of the promised land to the tribes of Israel. Shiloh is where where Eli raised Samuel. Think about that. So he was there in that city, and that's where he grew up. The tabernacle remained there until the Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines when the sons of Eli took it into the battlefield. And it's likely then that Shiloh was destroyed at that time, and it would have been around 1050 BC, according to Psalm 78, 60 through 61. It was certainly long gone by the time of the prophet Jeremiah, when God told him, "But go now to my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel." That means that prior to Jerusalem being the central location of worship for the Israelites, Shiloh was where the tabernacle was located for approximately 356 consecutive years, or the Talmud says 370 years. So just think about how long that was, that was their center of worship. God chose Joshua to lead the people after Moses died, and I'm sure Moses would have strongly concurred with that decision. But I think it seems likely that Joshua, being from Ephraim, was factored into God's choice as Shiloh being the place of the tabernacle. You know, that's where Joshua actually erected it. Or Joshua may have been factored into God's decision for Ephraim to be allotted Shechem and Shiloh. Either way, we can see the profound influence that Joshua had. You think about the influence Joseph had on the tribe of Ephraim and ultimately Israel. Likewise, the faithfulness of Joshua didn't just bless him, it blessed an entire tribe and an entire nation. Joshua died when he was 110 years old, the same age that Joseph died, which I think is something the Bible makes a point of when it lumps the fact that Joshua died at 110 years old with the scripture that Joseph's bones were buried at Shechem, and that's in Joshua 24, 29 through 32. I think the faithfulness of the Israelites during Joshua's life is a testament to his leadership and integrity. He still stands as one of the most faithful servants of the Lord in the entire Bible. Perhaps the greatest testament to his positive impact and his leadership is found in Joshua 29:31. It says, "Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of the Lord which he had done for Israel." While Joshua and the elders lived, the people remained faithful because the memory of God was preserved. After the death of Joshua, in Judges 2:11, it says, "The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, and they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt." Judges 2:10 says, "When all the generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord or the work which he had done for Israel." So what does it mean when the Bible says they did not know the Lord? To know God is much more than to just acknowledge his existence. When Joshua died, the people of Israel knew of Jehovah God. They just ceased to acknowledge him and their special relationship with him. They just treated him like one of many gods, and they ceased to fear him. I like the way that Joshua himself describes what it means to know God. In Joshua 24 and verse 14, it says, "Now therefore fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river." That's a great way to sum up what it means to know God. It's to fear him, to serve him in sincerity and in truth, and to put away any other gods. He said, "Serve the Lord, and if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served and were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I'd like to offer Joshua's words as an encouragement and invitation this afternoon. Know the Lord, fear him, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away any idolatry or distractions of this world. And don't be wishy-washy about it. Take a stand. And if you're a leader, if you truly have influence in your home, if you influence the behavior of those around you, then decide whom you will serve. Whatever your need is, please come while we stand and while we sing.